So I need a go.
Go.
Go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Continuous Discussions, the online forum where we talk about Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wallgren, and we have yet another in our special series of DevOps Enterprise Summit speaker forums, I guess we'll call them. And we've got Gene Kim and a number of great people with us today. And we've got some interesting topics to talk about. So Gene, take it away.
Perfect. Gene, you want to introduce folks, or do you want me to do it?
Is anyone getting a repeat? Hang on.
You might be muted.
No echo here.
Got it. I'm sorry. This is me. That shocked expression was me. Got it. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. This is another DevOps Enterprise Live Summit chat. These are all a group of experts that I've known for years, people I've admired. They're all experts and leaders in the DevOps Enterprise community who are helping shape so many of the practices that are becoming increasingly commonplace in technology organizations. There's no doubt in my mind that in 10 years, these will all become increasingly the norm. So next hour, our goal is to really talk about transformational leadership. This is something that Dr. Steve Mayner introduced me to several years ago. And we've collected some of the best experts I can think of who can help teach us about transformational leadership, which I think is going to be increasingly being in the forefront of I think both the obstacles of DevOps transformation as well as the factors that enable DevOps Enterprise. So, as a reminder, before we get started, the upcoming DevOps Enterprise San Francisco conference is taking place on November 13th to the 15th. And for more information, go to events.itrevolution.com. Announcement side, we have a couple more formats to help attendees and everybody achieve the learning objectives, including DevOps workshops, lean coffees. We have the Ask the Speaker Q&A sessions, as well as lightning talks that are always amusing as well as educational. So as part of getting started, why don't we just go round robin in the same order that we were doing before. If each panelist could say their name, company, and role, and what professional accomplishment you are most proud of. So I think the first one, let's go to Dominica first.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dominica DeGrandis, and I'm Director of Digital Transformation at TaskTop, which is headquartered in Vancouver, BC. And let's see. Well, digital transformation, basically, I help people optimize their workflow, like end-to-end, like the whole value stream, visually, technically. And my most, sorry, what was that? My most
professional accomplishment.
Professional accomplishment. It's got to be getting a book published.
Oh, congratulations, Dominica! And now shipping?
Now, well, yeah, it's at the warehouse. Pub date's November 14th, but available for pre-order. Most people are asking me, is it on Kindle? And yes, it is.
Awesome. In fact, on that, by the way, congratulations, Dominica. In fact, Mick was just showing a copy of your book, the first signed copy. Mick, why don't you introduce yourself next?
So I'm Mick Kersten. I'm founder and CEO at TaskTop. I think the professional accomplishment I'm most proud of is this. It's a kind of a long thread in my career. It's this discovery of this missing infrastructure layer, which I think in terms of today's conversation is really going to be more around missing communication layer. I happened upon it being a developer, realizing how disconnected I was from the value stream and doing this big experiment through my PhD on how to connect developers to the value stream and to the flow of communication, all the way from business and requirements through testing and ops and so on. And just, the company's just been an experiment to figure out how we actually create this layer and communicate about this layer and so on. So yeah, just looking forward to the discussion, because I think we've got this very large disconnect where, what I see behind Steve is actually an attempt at connecting some of that between the business layer that leaders need to now embrace and then this technical layer that we're getting so good at, it might be threatening some of the business.
So. We'll talk more about that later. Thank you, Mick. Dr. Kersten, and holy cow, 2 PhDs on the call. Dr. Steve Mayner, the person who actually introduced me to transformational leadership back when you were at SRA, right?
That's correct.
So tell us about yourself and professional accomplishment you are most proud of.
Sure. So hi, everybody. As Gene said, Dr. Steve Mayner. I'm currently working at Scaled Agile, a company that brought you safe. I spend most of my time teaching, consulting, speaking kind of all over the world, talking with leaders about lean and agile and DevOps practices in really, really big organizations. Professional accomplishment I'm most proud of, it's going to be one of those, it'd be easy to point to doctorates and different things, but really it's not that. As I really think back and reflect over 30 years in this, it's really been those small moments with individuals, kind of applying some of these practices and seeing how you can really affect people's lives positively in terms of seeing them as human beings, genuine care and concern, motivating them to achieve better things, and really seeing that play out in people's lives. That's what gets me up and gets me jazzed about this topic. Business results are great, but people trump everything.
Awesome. So without further ado, let's talk about transformational leadership. And Steve, I'll ask you to directly react to this. Just a brief story, and this kind of maybe reinforces why peer group is so important. We were hanging out someplace, and I asked you, what is your on? And you said transformational leadership, and then you rattled off, a whole bunch of characteristics that made my jaw drop, because you described in clinical precision all those attributes that I had seen in the DevOps Enterprise community. And we did a little experiment. We surveyed. We did an assessment of about 100 DevOps Enterprise people who've spoken, which and the results were off the chart. And so we integrated it into the State of DevOps Report 2017. So what I want to do is share with you the model we used and what the results were. So in this specific description of transformational leadership, they say there's 5 dimensions, 3 attributes in each one. And the first one is vision. To what extent does the leader understand where the organization is going? And in my mind, it can front of it, not to just be relevant, but to help with the achievement of the most important objectives for the organization. The second one was intellectual stimulation. To what extent can the leader challenge status quo, challenge basic assumptions how we do work? Just because we've done it the same way for 20 years doesn't mean that's the way we should be doing it today. Third is inspirational communication. To what extent can they get people within the team excited, maybe overcome deep-seated fears about career, profession, our department, and in my mind, even create coalitions around them to help overcome very powerful incumbent bureaucracies and power structures. And the fourth and fifth are supportive leadership and personal recognition. And I just loved, I think you told me, it's like servant leaders, they focus on the needs of the followers, whereas transformational leaders also focus on the needs of the organization. How am I doing here so far, Steve?
You're doing great.
All right, this made an impression on me. So after we did that first kind of survey, we went and integrated the State of DevOps. So we asked every respondent. I think the N was number of respondents was around 6,000. We asked every one of these questions, and here's what we found: leadership matters. Teams with the least amount of reported transformational leadership characteristics, the bottom third, were only 1/2 as likely to be high performers. So you can do it, but it's just maybe more difficult. And the other insight that came out of the study that I just loved was this, is that leaders don't do it alone. Leaders need teams with great technical practices and architectures and cultural norms. And the evidence of this was that you take the teams with the top 10% of transformational leadership characteristics, take the performance, compare it against the median, and they were actually worse. So this said that leadership's not sufficient. So Steve, can you, can you talk about, like, does this resonate with your own PhD studies? What are the differences? Can you highlight those? And maybe so important to the extent that you took years out of your life to get a PhD on this.
Yeah, so it certainly does, Gene. And just for those that are going to explore it for themselves, the 5-point model that Gene just shared is a representative of some of the more contemporary extensions of the research in the body of knowledge. It really began. You might come across a 4-point version of that dates back to the original positing of the theory by a man by the name of James McGregor Burns. Wrote a book called Leadership, and other researchers started taking and running with it. As Gene mentioned, it borrows a lot from servant leadership. So when you look at the things that are very empathetic to the follower, the care and concern for the individual, you see that in servant leadership. The communicating and inspiring, those motivating, those are very synergistic with charismatic leadership. What this body of knowledge sort of adds is this dimension of, while all those things are great, it also needs to be still aimed toward a purpose. And for our conversation, it's the business results, it's the aim of the organization. But the twist is, instead of falling back on older leadership patterns, so transactional leadership, great man theory, that, as Admiral David Marquet says, it's not about taking control and attracting followers. It's about giving control and growing leaders. And that's a different mindset on how we achieve those business results. It's changing the mission and the goal of the leader to not be the one driving everybody, but really creating an environment through decentralized decision making and empowerment, and setting a high bar of excellence and challenging the status quo, that just creates that opportunity for everybody to rise, everybody to demonstrate their leadership and their potential to achieve those business objectives. And that's really kind of the challenge that faces us in DevOps, right? No one person is going to come in and drive it by themselves. And Gene, we've seen that in case study after case study at your conference, right? With all those great leaders that have come to the stage, not one of them have talked about how they did it by themselves. And I think that's an amazing affirmation of these concepts in action. It's the proof in the concept, right?
Yeah, in fact, unless if you got a promotion, I think it's Captain David Marquette who wrote the book "Turn the Ship Around." No,
yes,
"Turn the Ship Around," right? Yeah. Absolutely. And actually, if queue up if applicable, otherwise I'll go in round robin order. Is kind of the I think what caught your attention, and that certainly caught my attention, is that the surprising characteristic of transformational leadership is that it asserts it is not that something you're born with. Instead, it's something that can be learned. Did I capture that correctly?
Absolutely. It's one of the most exciting things. One of the things you have to do in any doctoral program is you have to do a deep dive, swim around the existing body of knowledge and find all the related research. And that was one of the things that immediately caught my eye. It wasn't just one study, it was many studies that they were testing to see, can you, wherever you are in your leadership journey, can you learn to lead with these behavior patterns? And the answer from the peer-reviewed research is absolutely yes. So that's, I think, very, very encouraging. And it's really the message I was looking for, connecting these leadership patterns are good, not just in a vacuum. Everybody wants to be a great leader. But the reason as Gene, if you remember from our conversations, the reason I was going down this path was connecting this to the challenge of significant organizational change, culture change, those kinds of things that come along with implementing Agile DevOps, and the failures that we've all seen, and trying to solve for, why is that happening, and how can we change that equation, and finding in the research that it's these kinds of leadership behavior patterns that can really overcome those barriers that's causing the organizational change efforts to fail. And that's, to me, the real powerful value. If we want to be successful in our organizations, driving this different mindset, these different patterns for product development, that's a significant change. And, you know, statistics say, remember Cotter said 70% of all change efforts fail. We got to change that equation somehow. And, you know, these are the patterns that are connected to organizational change success. And good news is anybody can learn to lead this way.
Like in Ratatouille, right? Anybody can cook is maybe the theory. But I love kind of how the cross-population study of, let's say, DevOps can actually provide some insights and confirmation of your field of study. Dominica, I know that you've had numerous figures, not only being a transformational leader yourself, but you've had people in your career also exhibit these same sort of characteristics. Can you talk to that?
Sure. When it comes to inspirational communication and what Stephen was saying was everybody to rise, I think it's so valuable when we see leaders engage, everybody be involved, because the problem that we see is when people aren't involved, they don't have any skin in the game, they don't have buy-in, their ideas don't get expressed, and they walk away from the table unconvinced. And when we have, a department, or really doesn't have to be that many, just a few here and there, people who are unconvinced, then things happen half-heartedly, and there's passive resistance. So the great leaders that I've worked with have been able to really make it safe for people to express their ideas and get all that information out there in the open so people can digest it, people can think about it, and then they can come to some conclusions based on, these are, most people out there, they're just rational, decent people trying to do the right thing. But if they don't have a voice in the matter and they don't understand what's going on, then it's hard. So I'm very encouraged when I see leaders open up, make it possible for everybody in the organization to ask questions, and not in a large setting.
Yeah, right. In fact, it's funny. It's like sometimes it's passive resistance, and sometimes it goes to outright malicious compliance, right? Or or the dangerous holdouts, right?
Yeah, and I think one setup for that is when you go to the all hands, and the hippo, the highest paid person, is given the talk. It's sort of this one-way communication out to everybody. And yeah, there's an opportunity to ask questions, but the brave, the courageous people ask questions. I would say the majority of the people in the room are wondering, what did that mean? What does that really mean for us? And so then everybody goes off after the all hands into their separate little huddles to try and figure out what that means. And this is what contributes to this misalignment and this lack of coherence across the organization. I think good leaders recognize that and find a way to deal with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard this interview on NPR from Satya Nadella, who's by all accounts incredible transformational leader at Microsoft, and said one of the most petrifying things in the town hall meetings, everyone can post emojis. I don't know if it's anonymized or not, but he said it's a very he expects that level of candor, just how are people feeling about the message that he's delivering. Andres, what about you? Any examples? What would you in transformational leadership models, in your experience?
Yeah, I think we live and die, by these sorts of transformations, right? As a vendor in the space, and so it's interesting because I think I've seen almost everything, right? And although I probably haven't, I think the best sort of passive aggressive non-leadership I ever saw was at a bank in Australia, where one of the people in the meeting put their sunglasses on, lean back, put their feet up on the table, and sort of disengaged from the meeting. That was sort of probably the worst example I've ever seen of that was certainly leadership of some kind, just not the kind I wanted, or the kind anybody really wanted. But I think we've had the great pleasure of working with tons and tons of companies trying to do this. And what strikes me as really kind of interesting is that the true leaders are not always the people at the top, and they're not always the people at the bottom either. It really is all over the place. Sometimes you've got a grassroots contributor who really is the kind of the engine of innovation and pushes and those kinds of things. And sometimes it is one of the managers or one of the leaders who really pushes people hard on this stuff. So I think it's interesting that it's not always, it's not always the same kind of role in the company where that sort of leadership lands. They're probably not chosen. They just sort of become the leaders of those things.
In fact, why don't we cue this for a couple minutes? And I'd love to have Steve opine on that, because it's not just position authority that creates leaders. I mean, leaders come from everywhere in the organization, right? It's now more than ever. So yeah, I just put that to the queue. Nick, this is a topic that you and I have talked about at long lengths in terms of what are the characteristics of these people who can drive transformation successfully.
Yeah, so I think this tool that you guys have come up with here in terms of these dimensions and having some proof points in DevOps it's from the State of DevOps report is completely consistent with what I've seen succeed in terms of leaders who take control of transformations, but take control in this extremely take control at the business level while empowering the people, finding those individual contributors, as Anders said, will make the huge difference and the real changes. So for me, I think in terms of my own experiences, one of the most interesting things is having witnessed organizations who had a transformational leader and failed, versus those ones who had a transformation leader or a set of transformational leaders and succeeded. And so, Anders, I believe you may be in Scandinavia somewhere right now. Last time I was in Finland, I got to witness, and this was years ago, I got to kind of witness the tail end of the Nokia failure, where I was meeting with these IT leaders who were saying all the right things and were trying to do all the right things and spent a lot of time with Ken Schwaber, and we're looking at deploying Scrum. And the thing that struck me, because I will never forget those series of meetings and just the sort of dissonance that came from me in terms of trying to do all the right things, trying to get all the right tools, trying to move fast and so on, and then still leaving the place going like, this is going to fail, but not understanding why. And I think I now, through these conversations with you, Gene, and with others, I think I slightly better understand why. And it's that I was also meeting with all the technical people there as well, and the people actually, the teams doing the work. And then there were great technical people, right? These were people from the Symbian OS days, just top-notch engineers, CTOs I was talking to, and so on. And they both had these characteristics of transformation leaders. So again, they seem to have all the ingredients that we would conclude here, and it failed dramatically, I think largely at a technical and transformational level. And the thing that struck me, or one of the main things I took away, is they were speaking completely different languages, right? So the way that the business thought of Scrum and the way they're approaching transformation back then, and the way that the technical people thought of it were completely disconnected. They were measured, as leaders, by the way, I got the sense they were measured in completely different ways, right? In terms of how they approach these projects, their own bonuses, and so on. So there's this huge disconnect between this still, and it's beyond just being like a water scrumfall outcome, right? But the way that the business approached the transformation on this completely project-oriented path that had to do with cost reduction, and then could not make the right decisions around the fact that this platform could have never supported evolution to things like an app store. The business never understood the key architectural issues, technical debt issues. Interestingly, they'd understood all the security issues, so they invested heavily in those and had an extremely secure platform. So, but they knew the importance of time to market. They just could not make decisions around the fact that to go through their transformation with all the right intentions, they needed to re-platform, let's say, they needed to change something there. So I think we're lacking. One of the biggest lessons for me is that we need to connect this language, which is why I actually think where I've seen a scaled agile framework, I've actually seen it used as a tool to connect those two worlds, right? To connect this world of high-level business requirements with the technical language, and I think that's where we've seen this thread of connection. We have to do so much better on that thread, not just as a product and project management activity, which SAFe helps with, but as a technical activity and understanding why. Release frequency and those kinds of concepts are important at a business level, which this community is doing. So I think we need to give these, because we will see two types of transformational leaders now. I think this is, Gene, something you and I talked about. Those ones that come from the technical side and actually just innately understand these concepts, and they move up in the organization. There are going to be a lot of those leaders that came from the business side, the finance side, and so on. If we don't establish this common language, we're setting both up for failure.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that really struck me in the DevOps Enterprise Summit was just the fact there were clear such personalized the business outcome that they needed. That they were using it to break rules. They weren't asking for permission, but the outcome is that they achieved the business result, and in many cases they're being promoted. In fact, that's something there may be still time to do. I actually want to do a little informal poll. What percentage of the speakers were promoted in the last 3 years? I think it's going to be over 50% or more. And so I think this kind of reinforces your notion, Mick, that are the business, they are significant business leaders in their own rights. Does that resonate with everybody on the panel?
It certainly does for me. Is the people who can break into the business side of the conversation with either their technical background, their managerial backgrounds, what they've learned as leaders. Those are the people getting promoted in healthy organizations, right? So,
any other thoughts on that? So let's go to the thing that
I was just gonna say I was going to wholeheartedly agree with that. In fact, in the classes that I teach, it's one of the things that I coach the coaches is you got to speak in the language of the business, right? It's great if our leaders learn our language. That's a bonus. But they're the ones on the top deck trying to navigate markets and economics and supplier chains and all kinds of challenges. If we learn their language and speak to them from where they're seeing the world, instead of expecting them to come to our turf, you'll be a far more valuable coach and change agent.
Right, as opposed to having
I think it's
That's hard to be about.
Situation too. Oh, sorry.
Anders and then Dominica. Anders, Dominica.
Yeah, I think it can be quite situational too, because I've certainly seen failures where it was culture. I think we've all seen that. I think what I'm seeing more often now is not necessarily failure, but challenges due to architecture, and especially quote unquote legacy architecture. It sort of becomes the immovable object around which you just have to figure out how to solve that problem. And if you don't have the business and the technical really working to plan how to fix that problem and get to more loosely coupled architectures and those kinds of things, then that becomes a huge barrier to success.
And to your point, right, architecture is not something that's not a team concern. Architecture is something that spans many, many teams. And so then again, we're back in the realm of architecture. Absolutely. Dominica.
I want to share an observation I have working with a company where one of the biggest problems was sales and marketing and other business people weren't really clear exactly on what development was doing with this feature and why it was taking so long. And so then they start having demos. Okay, come to the demo and you can see it and then you'll be able to talk about it. Well, then at the demo, the developers and engineers and architects are talking up here, and the salespeople, they're just wondering where in here, how does this change help me speak to our customers? Like, that's kind of the bottom line for them. How does this thing you're talking about impact this year's goals? And so then we saw the format of those demos change to where it was, what is it? What's this thing? What's this feature? What's this change? And to why it matters. why does this matter to our business, to our customers, to our yearly goals? And then third was, kind of what's next coming up the pipe to give people kind of a heads up on what's coming next so people aren't blindsided. But that slight shift in how the demo was performed made a profound difference to salespeople out in the field.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In fact, it kind of reminds me. So there's a scene in the Phoenix Project where the hero Bill and the security person go into and just go to the top 5 objectives, and it's like all of them have a significant reliance on technology. But I mean, that really was kind of recalling, like, if I could do my tripwire journey again, I would always be speaking to that. I mean, I'd always be. In fact, I even have the hand gesture down. I would always be looking at, be showing the top 5, things that mattered to the CEO when it's being reported to the board, and that came from a very personal place of something I wish I had learned earlier in my career. So speaking of leaders, Andres made a point. It's like leaders are not just the people at the top of the org chart. They happen. We need leaders everywhere. Do you agree? Do you agree with that statement? Anybody? Otherwise, I'll go. No. Steve.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the other leadership thought leaders that's been around for decades, John Maxwell, you may know his work, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And one of the very first ones is the law of the lid, the idea that we don't all have strengths in every area, as much as we'd like to. And the anecdotes he shares about leaders who recognize that and said, in this situation, my expertise in this area, I'm only a 5. I'm the institutional leader, but for this effort, I'm going to put myself on your team, because far more. This is a strength for you. So, how can I be a member of your team, and just reversing it and sort of, really recognizing that anybody in the organization, based on what they're bringing to the table, can lead in one situation or another. And that's another dimension of this type of leader that really creates the environment of it. It's, empowerment's kind of a loaded word, but that's a way to kind of see how that works. But the leader has to create the environment that makes it very clear that that's a good, healthy, and expected, and something that's going to be rewarded, culturally in the organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of, like, in some special forces units, they have such cross training where the situation dictates who takes the lead based on skills, experience, and so forth.
Exactly.
Any other comments on this one?
Yeah, I just want to rewind a little bit and try to disagree with Steve here. I actually think the business has to learn our language. So I agree with you, Steve, that the people who learn the business language are more successful. But as you were saying it, I was just thinking through this, and again, in terms of how we help these leaders become more successful, and look at where this is all moving. If you look at the digital native companies or the unicorns, which of them, I've not done this work, but now I'm curious, which of them don't have a technically savvy leader who actually understands some of the issues Anders mentioned about architecture? Because I bet all, or the vast majority of them do. But what's happening in terms of the rest of the world and the rest of the global economy, this has grown around business leaders. So yes, we need, somehow that technical language, the understanding of architecture, of technical debt, of concepts where we can marry the technical side of things with the business side of things, like lead time, which you can pretty easily translate to time to market for a business leader. Those the business leaders have to start understanding, or they need to start empowering in the organizations the need for this. For people who understand that technical language. So again, I agree with the outcome of what you're saying, but I don't think the businesses that stand by and don't understand at some of the technology or empower the individual contributors, because we know at some of these large companies that are some individual contributors and principals are extremely influential and do have the ear of the business leaders and do have a seat at the table. So I think there needs to be a bigger change from the current guard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in the last webinar we had about the Equifax CEO, apology, as a result of that, I read all 140 pages of the congressional testimony that
Really? Wow.
Richard Smith gave, former CEO of Equifax. And it was interesting. I mean, He actually does, halfway through say it was his responsibility as a leader, but then 20 other places he says it's one person's fault. But it is interesting. You kind of go through their disclosure and how they between counsel and so forth. I think the issue was not about that they know about the breach. It was really the missing piece. The insight that I got out of the last webinar was, do business leaders have the right context of like how much technical debt is there? Do we need to repair? Take an airplane offline for a little bit so that we can repair the engines, right? I mean, that's a critical part of the business planning process that might be absent. In fact, and so that's a kind of a thesis I've formed. I guess if we can just hold that thought for just a second. I mean, one of the things that is very interesting to me is listening to one of the top obstacles that have been verbalized in the DevOps Enterprise community when we ask, what are the obstacles in your way? You being, the transformational leader trying to push modern, technical practices, modernization, and so forth. One of the things that has always been up there is, how do I get others on board? And kind of the implicit statement is the more conservative leaders, often in ops leadership, and in some certain conversations, talking to these, it's like they're being so protective of their turf, because the way they've been trained is that you start off with say a $5 million budget to 10 million to 30 million, and that's what gets to 50 million, and then soon you're in charge of the whole enchilada, right? And it all becomes now a turf battle, right? What do you do, whether storage or networking or whatever. And for years I felt like when you hear people like that, they talk more like union leaders, which have their place, but they're not talking like business leaders. They don't have the health of the long-term health of the organization, fully factored into their decision making. So, why don't we start with Steve again? Steve, this seems like getting these people on board is a critical part of why transformational leadership is so important. And you had a story about a government agency about like training these leaders, middle managers, about this new world that they're still important. They're still very important, but the skills that they need to bring to bear are different. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, and well, you talk about, I worked with, as Gene knows, with the federal government for many years, and wow, so many stories that I could. One of those unhealthy ones was an agency I worked with where these two leaders were both in the running for the senior post, who the guy was retiring, and so it was like all out war between the dev side and the ops side, not just because of the normal DevOps factors, but because of their own radically sub-optimized personal interests, and everybody just got to suffer because of that.
Like Game of Thrones, in real life.
It was. I saw it play out, and it was not pretty. But yeah, so I don't know if there's a magic pill to make somebody really sort of retool who they are as a person, and as Jim Collins talks about, sometimes there's not a seat on the bus for those folks. If they can't see where that doesn't really work in the kind of organization that we want to become. But at the same time, I think yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm on your DevOps Enterprise talk, of which we should. What better time than now, in front of all our friends and family? You had mentioned there was a government agency where you said we still need you, but we need your network, we need your relationships, we need to call in favors, we need you to eliminate obstacles. I mean, for me, you framed so well what assets these leaders have built up over decades that now more than ever we need that, but it looks different.
Absolutely. In fact, I had a call with somebody that I had worked with just last week when I was on the road, and he is still struggling with, okay, what am I supposed to do now? What's my value? And I sort of replayed that same conversation of, and this person happened to be a senior dev manager, right? And in an organization implementing SAFe, we've got product management and release train engineers and all these different roles where decentralized decision making, self-organizing teams, you've got architects doing architectural stuff, you got product management making decisions about the prioritization of the backlog and the product. And this guy was like, those were all things I used to do. What do I do now? And I had to replay that same conversation of, look, if you're really jazzed by finding great people and growing great people and helping people find opportunities and growing their technical experience, and who in our normal agile view of roles is paying attention to those kinds of things? Well, the answer is typically no one is. They're all off doing something different. So there's still those important things to do. When the teams and the trains have impediments they're trying to resolve, well, where do you think they're going to get those impediments resolved? I mean, we never really talk about that. Who are they going to? Well, there are excellent leaders in the organization who still hold fiduciary responsibility, people management responsibility, that have experience, they have network connections, they know the systems, they know where all the dead bodies are buried. I mean, they've got the institutional history. They are the folks that can walk into offices and help overcome barriers if their mindset is such that, hey, that's part of the value that I add to the entire effort to get value out the door. It's a mindset thing. It's whether or not leaders are willing to embrace a different way of how they do what they do. Just like David Marquet, right? He had to get over that that stereotypical captain on the bridge, ordering everything to happen. But once he made that mental shift, he realized just how much more effective that new leadership model could be. So it's that's the challenge for a lot of those folks, especially in that middle layer, because I often talk in my classes to coaches and change agents. You got to start with empathy. You got to understand why these folks are reacting viscerally like they are, and it really goes down to the safety and security, that base level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's the fear of, this is such a radically different model. Am I going to be successful? Can I adopt? Can I change? Am I going to be around? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to care for my family? These are the things that they're having, and they're not at a high enough level to really feel like they've got real control over their situation. It's kind of happening to them. Easy to fall in victim mode. So a lot of these things are boiling around in their minds, and we just need to reinforce the value that they do bring to the organization if they're willing to learn some new things and really leverage the assets that they bring to the organization, sometimes in a different way, but still very valuable.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, I just want to point out, I mean, these are, sometimes existential levels of fear, right? I mean, it's like, what is my role? I mean, that takes a lot of vulnerability to even share that. And you compound that, I remember when we first introduced Agile into Tripwire, and this was 2004, and I didn't know, I mean, people were using terms I'd never heard of, a scrum, a spike, and I wish I were more comfortable in those days, just saying, I don't understand what these words are. Could someone please explain them to me? And even like when someone did explain it to me, not feeling stupid, right? It's like, it was just, I felt so on the spot, but man, that's sort of that ability to be willing to learn and learn how to learn is something, is probably one of the most important skills now more than ever. Anders.
I think incentives matter too, whether they're business incentives or organizational or cultural incentives. We've got customers who are on, they do cost plus contracts for governments, and they have zero interest in building good architectures because all they do is literally do a CP minus R on the previous product, copy 10 million lines of code, and then kind of start working with that again. So it's difficult to work in those kinds of organizations where the incentives are all screwed up from the point of view of, I think what I would like to see, maybe not necessarily screwed up from their profit margins point of view. But then you also get into situations where, the purpose of an organization sometimes becomes solely to perpetuate itself, not to provide value for its customers, you know, but just to become bigger and that can be a little bit perverse as well.
There is a cynical. There's a guy named John Gall who wrote a book called Systemantics about the craziness of bureaucracies and processes, and that is one of his core theses. It is like anything becomes eventually inwardly looking. Right?
Yeah, it's almost like you need to blow it up and start over every few years just to make sure that doesn't happen. But that may not be practical either.
Very interesting. Mick, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I want to add to that as well. So I think that all three of you, Gene and Steve and others, you touched on this. I think a lot of the organizations, I think a lot of the people listening to this podcast, the organizations they're working within, I bet we have a lot of transformation leaders who are listening, but they feel stuck in those organizations. And I think there are two key things that I've seen in terms of pattern across the hundreds of these customer meetings that I've done for large IT shops that I think are just completely thwart and demotivate transformational leaders. And one is the way that and I think these are related, the way that these budget centers are set up, right? The fact that the ops and the dev budgets tend to be separate. And as you said, there'll be a turf war, who gets promoted. But in the end, the budget silo lines are there. DevOps broke through it at a technical level. But now we've got all these great and aspiring transformation leaders who are trying to break through it at the business level. And some of these organizations are missing the tools. So Anders, if it's like you said, basically where the CP minus R is the path for the next project, we know that's self-limiting, the same way that we know that this command and control style of management.
CP minus R, can you define that?
Oh, sorry. To copy
literally they will take the last set of source code from the previous project and just copy it.
Yeah.
No source code control system.
Copy cursive. Got it. Okay, got CP minus R. Got it. Keep going. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you've got too much, and if you've grown up around, I don't know, manufacturing, that might actually seem like a good thing with software. But if you've ever touched software, then you want to cry. So, because you know how much, you just doubled your technical debt, right? So the economics of this are just insane. But so that, we know we've got these leaders. We know you guys are listening. And then I think the question is how you go away from those old silos, because I think that the two things that we all know is that the silos are self-limiting. The companies that succeed through transformations will have somehow done something about those. And I think, Steve, you mentioned this magic pill. I'll say two magic pills that I'm seeing consistently. One is that in addition, you can't get rid of these silos overnight, right? People have made their careers this way, and they're not moving that quickly. That these companies have formed transformation budgets, some of the successful ones, who I'm seeing at least making headway. And the transformational leader and collection of them, because they might be kind of matrix across the organization, or you'll have some amazing individual contributors and technical visionaries in there as well. There is a budget that the transformation leader has, because again, if they have no power to make tool chain transformations, process transformations, all the re-engineering you need to do, they just get to talk a lot, and they can't drive as much change. So I think the key thing is the organization has a transformation budget with a transformation leader at its head, and ideally a team of them. And then that the organization goes away from the very scary world Anders just vividly painted, to aligning the business to the value streams, right? So if you don't become, that's when the business gets to make the right decisions. When you start looking at a value stream centric way, and then things like lead time dominate on time on budget, or cost reduction, or these weird hybrids of cost per story point being the only thing you manage to in your transformation. So I think there has to be a transformation budget, and there has to be a business level measure of the alignment of the value stream that goes across the silos. If you don't go across those silos, again, you'll just optimize the ops piece, you'll optimize the dev piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was in the Leffingwell training at the Scale Agile SPT trainings. And SPC, thank you. And something that Leffingwell, I mean, just what his history, it was just impossible to learn just so much. But I mean, he said, one of these things that he said that I just found astonishing is that the way typical projects budgets work is that if the project succeeds, you don't have any money to exploit the win, right? It's like you have just enough fuel on the war front, but if you break through, you can't go further, right? You can't exploit business advantage. And I just thought that was like one of these absurd situations that is, but it's not obvious until you see it. It was just amazing. Dominica, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, two thoughts on this, actually, on this transformational leadership topic. One, how are people incentivized? People are, how do they get their sense of worth? And if the head of marketing's, review at the end of the year comes down to getting that one thing delivered, that project delivered, and the head of media or sales is being measured and valued by getting some, that threshold of sales done, and those two things compete with each other, we're going to have issues on people not working together, people not collaborating, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I think to have that conversation, people need to have the facts, right? Facts form the foundation of belief. Facts help people believe. And to do that, does leadership actually have the facts, or is it people with strong opinions? Are we able to show and tell leadership the facts that they need to know in order to make the good decisions? Or is our organization withholding information because we're afraid to tell leadership that this event is happening or not happening? And I think that we need to, again, I think it comes back to safety of being able to look at the facts, take them for what they are before just spouting our opinion. Who was it that said, if we're going by data, let's look at the data, but if we're just going with opinion, we'll go with mine.
I love that. Great quote. So, I guess always shift the focus to, we have a better idea of kind of what the end state, at least the direction of it is. I think we would submit that, transformational leadership is a part of that. So, how do where does one learn about it? Steve, you have a story about how you, based on this notion that transformation can be learned, at SRA, you were chartered with the mission to teach transformational leaders to all levels of leadership, both as measured by org chart, as measured by technical capability. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, well, this is kind of the thrust of the session that I'm doing. It's really sort of just sharing a story of what I went through in my last company that was facing one of those existential crisis moments as a company, where we're going to survive or not. And really the story of our transformational leader at the very top, who looked around and said, do we have the right leader behaviors to transcend this, to not just survive but thrive in this crisis? And he looked around and he said, no. He pulled some of his people and said, what do we do about it? Can we bring somebody in to really tool us up to rise to this challenge? And unfortunately, there wasn't plenty of consulting houses, but nothing really like that could come in and help us figure out how to retool an entire leadership cadre for the company. And so we built our own, and it was built around a lot of these very same leaders. It was all the things we've talked about, having very clear picture of where it was we were trying to go, but then equipping and then unleashing people at every level. And I do mean every level. We started at the C-suite and the executive VP level, and they went through a process all the way down to upper and middle level management, to program managers running all the 90% of the revenue for our company, all the way down to individual teams. We invested in training 175 teams around the world, program teams, on what it means to be a high-performing team. What are those behaviors? So leadership could be demonstrated, at the most, junior level on any program. And it was about, a 1.5 to 2 year process, and some pretty amazing results. In terms of, you look at the metrics of the time, all the people in our market segment, when everybody else was tanking and all the bar line charts were going down, here's this one little company whose numbers are going in exactly the opposite direction. And everybody was wondering in the trade magazines and so forth, the analysts, what are you guys doing, that everybody else is not doing, which was, it was a pretty amazing time to be there and to watch it and be a little bit behind the curtain and seeing, what the leaders felt they had to invest in from a, retooling of leadership to really create the environment that would unleash the entire workforce to tackle these, what they call adaptive challenges of adaptive leadership, another body of knowledge there, but these, things that we don't know the answer to, we don't know how we're going to solve. So, we've really got to unlock all the brain power to find our way through it, and that's kind of what we did. We built it ourselves.
What was the timing on that? How long did that take from when you first started that transformation to when you started seeing some results?
Some of the things, depending on which metric you're looking at, were almost immediate. The financials took about 2 years to turn around. So first, just like everybody else, our numbers were all, revenues, annual losses, things like that. First, it bottomed out. So we held our own, and then we finally turned the numbers up. And just watching that process was, like, wow, this is really for real. And it's not just the fact that people went to a training, it's what they did going back. It's one program at a time, people finding ways to be wickedly efficient was one of our mantras, or ways to, just create such wow for a customer that when our contract was recompeted, they didn't want to go anywhere else but us, right? Because they wanted to maintain that experience. So, we had to tackle it on a team by team, program by program, but it had to be everybody working on it all at the same time to bend the curve, and it worked.
Yeah, in fact, so Steve, the question I was going to ask, but I don't think we don't have time. But there's some amazing personal stories that came out of this in terms of, in fact, we were at dinner in London. I was in tears just hearing some of these stories of like what people were able to do in terms of, I guess, achieving the true potential that they had, that should have been had for the last 20 years, right? It's impossible not to be moved by that. And I'm hoping you will be sharing those stories at DevOps Enterprise Summit.
Absolutely.
Why don't we just do a quick round, just maybe closing insights, thoughts, and then we'll go to conclude. Steve, thanks for those thoughts. Let's do Mick to make it honors.
I'll just be brief. I'm just excited that this conversation that we need to have around the communication mechanisms, the leadership, the connecting the technical to the business. I think the event happening in 3 weeks, DevOps Enterprise Summit, there is no better event for that conversation. That's why I got so excited to be part of this community. So I hope everyone listening tunes into that, because I think this is where the discoveries happen.
And by the way, we're even thinking, Steve and I were sort of brainstorming, maybe for the DevOps Enterprise Forum community, this is actually something we spend a day and just learn what Steve taught at SRA. Maybe that's an idea. Send me any thoughts on that if you're interested, people. Dominica.
I love the conversation on how to get buy-in. I think that's critical for how people are going to improve and transform at all levels. How do we get alignment all the way through the organization, top to bottom and horizontally? So it's actually one of the topics that we're going to be probably discussing at some of the workshops, the lean coffees at DOES in San Francisco next month.
Oh, awesome. And we will do our best. We'll do everything we can to enable those discussions. Anders.
I lean on Leo Tolstoy in situations like this. All happy families are like every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. All these situations are unique. Organizations got to where they are in the way that they did, and that history matters, and the situation that they're in, business-wise and culturally and personally, and all of those things. And it's really difficult to kind of walk in with a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to this. And I think we all have to just sort of figure out the lay of the land when we at least us working with so many different companies, and figure out what how did we get here. You almost have to be a little bit of a armchair therapist to figure out how to move things forward. But then you find that hopefully one person, man or woman who will become that leader, who really will sort of be the force multiplier, which is a silly term, but I think it's kind of effective in this case. So I think it's it's important to look at the particulars of how a particular organization got to where they are, because that matters when you're going to dig it all back out.
Yeah, in fact, it's to really motivate Steve's point, right? So those people with the history, with the relationships, and if I heard it right, sometimes it's good to know where the dead bodies are to avoid them, or sometimes it's good to know where they are so you can horse trade, for the greater good. Hope everyone has learned as much as I have today. Thank you so much for all the panelists, Anders, Dominica, Mick, and Steve. This is I've learned so much about transformational leadership, and hopefully by seeing kind of what we do with these things, they show up in the conference, they show up in the State of DevOps report. It's just very meaningful to me to have these interactions. So I hope to see everybody. I will see all of you on November 13th to the 15th at DevOps Enterprise San Francisco. Everyone here will be speaking. Specifically, Steve Mayner will be talking about transformational leadership journey. Practice at SRA, so I'm very excited for that. And so be sure to get registered before tickets sell out. For updates, they are available online at events.itrevolution.com. So with that, thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam and Anders.
Fantastic. So I would just repeat what you said. I've got the slide up with the URL for folks to come and register for the conference. We're super excited as a founding partner of the conference. We love these conversations. We're glad that folks are getting educated about how to apply these principles in their own organizations. It's a ton of value to unlock by doing it. So we're looking forward to seeing everybody at the conference.
Same here. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.